Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am moderating. I am also the associate producer. My name is Giselle Töngi, and I'm so happy for our first series of Beyond Conversation. We have joining us today Pulitzer Prize-winning author and author of Dear America, which is actually...
It's out there.
Yes, out there if you'd like to get a copy signed. He joins us today from San Francisco, Jose Antonio Vargas.
Thank you for having me.
So Jose, there's a lot going on in the play.
Yes, there's a lot going on.
Did you see any parallels with your life?
Well, wait a second. I'm still kind of unpacking. It's rare. I'm Filipino. I was in the Philippines since I was 12. But like any Filipino, can you raise your hand if you're Filipino? I'm just curious how many Filipino people are. Okay, great.
3 people.
3 people. So we have this thing called the Filipino channel, which is like our Univision Telemundo thing. And so I don't think it's rare to see like Tagalog spoken like that.
On stage. Here in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, which is kind of ironic since there's a lot of Filipinos here in LA. Mm-hmm. So there's so much happening in this play that I'm not sure, and I love that the playwright felt like he could have Tagalog and not have to translate it. Like there were some phrases that if you don't speak Tagalog, you miss, but hopefully you got in context. Like, pangit means ugly. People, pangit means ugly, itim means black or darker. So there was like, it was actually wonderful though that the playwright didn't feel the need to have to translate that in the context of the text.
So there's, in the play, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on,
right?
Yes, which is wonderful.
And the fact that you have been very open about being undocumented.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I'm undocumented. So ICE can come here for real, come get me. But hey, I have a book,
He has a book.
I have an organization called Define American. My colleague Big Knock, Big Knock sits here. So we have an organization called Define American. Half of our staff is actually in LA, and our job is how do we more accurately and with humanity portray immigrants in this country, documented and undocumented. And the Filipino population is among the largest undocumented population in this country, the largest among all the Asian people, right? Although some people would not even refer to Asian people, Filipinos as Asian, which is complicated.
Because people think you are Mexican.
Because people think, because of my name, Spanish colonialism. And it was really interesting how this play really addressed all of that. I love how it complicated the conversation. I really appreciated all the subtle but very, what's the phrase I'm looking for? This complication between America and the United States and what America offers, right? And actually, one anecdote, I don't think, G is a dear friend of mine. I don't think I even said this to her. So I have a cousin in the Philippines. I left the Philippines when I was 12, and I haven't been back since. Because if I leave, they won't let me come back in, thanks to Bill Clinton, once he signed into law in 1996. So I haven't been back, but I have a cousin. Most of my cousins that I grew up with all have left the Philippines and all come here legally, who are now naturalized U.S. citizens. I'm the only one out of maybe 17 cousins, right? But I have one cousin who stayed in the Philippines, who's now a doctor. His practices his own. He has his own practice, 3 clinics in Manila, 1 in Makati, which is kind of a big deal. Makati is like our New York City, I guess. Is that right, Chi? Okay. So he was here visiting me when I used to live in LA, and we had this really intense conversation from my apartment in downtown to the Filipino store in Vermont, just like a few blocks from here. And he said to me, "Do you ever regret leaving? You should just go back." And then I said to him, "Would you want to come here?" Because he can't, he would qualify for a visa because he's a doctor, he owns property, and he's an upper middle class person. And he said, "No, enough people have left." He said that he finds the need to stay, and that he thinks it's really problematic that in the Philippines, people feel like they have to leave the Philippines to be somebody.
Very true.
And that he said that he had decided to be somebody in the Philippines, and that was enough. It was hella tense in the car. I had not seen him since I was 12 and he was like 14. And it was really, and I love that kind of ambiguity and complexity. And I love that this piece of theater held on to that. It didn't answer questions. It posed a lot of different questions, which I'm sure some of you are still maybe grappling with as you're sitting here. But I really feel strongly that, you know, for theater, especially in this country, to keep moving forward, this is the kind of work that needs to, you know, be supported and be staged and be part of the conversation itself.
I'd like to just read an excerpt.
Oh gosh, okay.
Of Dear America, page 77, where you say, I decided that I must not play the perfect victim. In my mind, victim and illegal were one and the same. I convinced myself that someone, somewhere, somehow created the master narrative of illegality. Human beings identified as illegals as if one's existence can be deemed unlawful. Illegals serving Americans either by babysitting their kids or trimming their lawns or constructing their houses or harvesting their crops. The images and visuals perpetuated by the news media, corroborated shows and movies, human beings being told that they cannot do and what they cannot do and where they cannot go. And that just struck me because watching this play, there's so many parallels with mothers, forced migration, coming here to have their children, and yours was, you know, your mother made a huge sacrifice.
So it was my mom who did it. But then, you know, I thought towards the end when the question about, you know, should they have to come here to have their kids? Is it that this idea of America being better? Right? And I thought that, of course, if you know American history and Philippine history, which is interlinked, knowing that, you know, America, the Philippines is adjacent to America because of what America did to the Philippines, right? It's this really long, complicated
yes,
relationship. But I think it gets to this idea though, and I love that the administrator said at the end there something about, you know, my relatives waited 11 years and here you are taking advantage of this system.
My
Parents, thank you. Sorry, administrator. Parents. Putang ina, she's pissed. Sorry, administrator. What's her name? She did a great job, by the way. So, right, and so I love that though. I love that because I think it's important that we acknowledge that that's part of the complexity. That the system is definitely not perfect, meaning that people can wait 11 years, while there are people who can wait like 17 years, like my mom. And because of what the Trump administration is doing, by the time she's able to come in 2 years, she may not be able to come because she doesn't have merit, right? Like what's at stake right now in immigration is
the merit-based
this idea that people need to have merit to come. If that is the case, there would not be 2 million Filipinos in the United States, including how many more TNTs? Because there's so many undocumented Filipinos that I bet you we don't have an actual count at all. We do not have an actual count. And given that the citizenship test is in question for the census, I think a lot of immigrant families are going to be even more unwilling to want to be counted.
Right.
So we have no idea how many undocumented people really there are in this country, including undocumented Filipinos.
You talk about this merit-based system, and reading your book, you talk a lot about wanting to earn being an American citizen. To the point that you won a Pulitzer, you worked for the Washington Post, the New York Times, all without the proper documents to do so, right? But what was this idea now that, you know, you've achieved so much in your career, you have a book that's out. I want to talk about the mental ramifications of what it means to be in hiding, right? You don't tell anybody where you're going next. Like, these are real situations that people may not understand.
So I should put some context. So I've been here since I was 12, so I just turned 38. So like 25, almost 26 years, right? So I haven't seen my mom since, like I kind of had this life where I thought I should just be on the run so no one can catch me. Like I lead a life like that, right? Like my friends are like, we don't know where he's going, we don't know where he is. And I thought after Trump got elected that I had had enough of that and I was gonna leave, like, voluntarily self-deport. So that was my plan. And I actually told Big Knock, my colleague, that I was doing this. And then I said, hey, I'm gonna go write this book to make sense of how messed up I am. Which is what the book is about, really. The book is actually about the mental psychology of what this is about, right? Like, what does it feel like? And part of the theme that I really wanted to explore is the earning part of it, right? Like, which is, again, complicated. Like, since I was a kid in California, I've been told that people like me should earn our citizenship, that we have to assimilate, we have to speak English well, right? We have to be somebody, American. Be something more than what Americans can't even be themselves, right? Yeah. So you ask so much of us. We have to be certain things. We have to be good. We have to be unassailable, right? We have to, quote unquote, assimilate. I did so well doing that, and then I was miserable. It was awful, right? I didn't like saying that I was Filipino. Actually. Because Filipinos have such a storied history, I just let people assume that I was someone else, right? I didn't really talk about being Filipino until I was like, I think 27 or 28. Even though I speak perfect Tagalog, thank God, right? Like I speak perfect Tagalog, speak Sambal, which is part of Sambales, where my grandparents are from. But I didn't want to use that tongue because I knew the moment it slipped out, like in my H's, like Filipino, there's no H in Tagalog. So when someone says da versus the, you can easily catch that they have an accent. Like, I did not want to do that. And so that, never mind the papers and the laws, like that sense of having to lose yourself to be someone that Americans themselves can't even be, carries a certain kind of toll. So part for me for the book was realizing for myself, without the help of a therapist, so the book was a therapy, was that I actually didn't have to earn this. Right? Now mind you, I have to be like an actual, I shouldn't drive I shouldn't be drinking while, there are certain things that I have to do as a person, but this idea of earning something should not be part of that equation. So I thought that was a really interesting context too in relation with this play, and kind of how this idea that what Filipinos what are we surrendering exactly, and why must we surrender it? The great Broadway director George C. Wolfe, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Angels in America. I went to a workshop once years ago, I'm a big theater geek. And he gave this talk when he said that movies are for stories, television is for characters, you follow a character season by season. Theater is for ideas. Theater is for ideas. And I think we saw something kind of rare here, which is that we actually saw a lot of ideas being thrown at us in a narrative that is not only organic to the community, but is very provocative. And I hope that, I'm really glad that it's playing here, and hopefully more people will come see it too.
Thank you to Skylight Theatre, of course, for
Skylight
producing this piece of theater. Never do you see in Los Angeles Filipinas on stage playing Filipinas.
Oh my God! What a...
Right?
Is Scarlett Johansson busy? Did she not? I love her. Did she not audition? Just kidding.
The writer is Filipino, Boni Alvarez, great work.
I really encourage you to read the writer's letter in the playbook, because I thought it kind of added some real context too.
Okay, so before we open up questions to the audience, I do have one more thing that I'd like to ask you.
Okay, great.
You said, choose not to call racism what it is, allowing a white supremacist ideology to hide behind phrases like chain migration, anchor babies, and the rule of law. And obviously we heard anchor babies one too many times when we were watching this, but why do you say that that is specifically taken from a white perspective?
I have been recently fascinated by Irish history, just maybe because I love Bill O'Reilly so much. Okay. I've been on a show when he used to have a show, And I was always fascinated when Bill would say, my great-great-grandparents did it the right way. And then the camera, when you do Fox, after the camera goes off, I never had the chance to actually say to him on camera, well, wait a second, Bill, like, what was the right way? You mean they showed up, right? They took boats, they called them coffin ships, because so many people died on the way here, right? They got on boats, they got here, no papers, no visa, no green cards, no saving thousands of dollars. They had babies, apparently lots of them, right? As the Lower East Side of Manhattan will tell you, right? And then what happened? And so this idea that all of a sudden that was okay for the Irish and the Italians and the Germans, and now when the Chinese or the Filipinos or the Koreans do it, it's anchor babies. Like, what's different about that, right? Was it the right way because they were from Europe, right? I mean, that's a really complicated question.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not defending or suggesting anything. I'm just saying that if it was okay for the Irish, why isn't it okay for the Filipinos? Right? And mind you, we were taken over. It wasn't our choice if the United States had to come to the Philippines so that it can have, a market for its industries. Mm-hmm. It's not our fault that you needed to sell Spam. That's not our fault. Right? But we don't want to talk about faults. That gets too complicated. But I think we have to understand that the push-pull factors of migration is directly tied to how the Western world has decided, who gets to tell whose history and who gets to own whose narrative. And I think this work, Boni's work, hopefully, will be part of this whole larger conversation about the new retelling of American history that we have to tell ourselves, so that everybody can see their stories and their narratives up on a stage.
Thank you, Jose.
Yeah.
We'd like to open up the
I'm curious about your
conversation
questions.
with people that are here in the
Wait, are those the
audience.
actors? Yay!
Yes!
Ang galing naman. Ang galing.
Amazing
Yay!
work. Amazing work. Any questions for our audience that are here,
Yes, please,
since
somebody.
we have Jose here?
So how, because there's DACA where the kids are.
Yes, so everybody here knows what DACA is? Great, okay, DACA, yes.
And so how, as a 12-year-old, it sounded like your mother didn't accompany you.
Yeah.
So how did you get here?
A plane. So I was my mom said, I had an uncle who was taking me here, and I'm Filipino. Everybody's an uncle. So I met this guy for the first time. My mom said it was my uncle. I got here. I actually landed at LAX, and in the book I actually talked about that because I thought I was in the wrong country. Because I thought America was like Oprah and Macaulay Culkin and Julia Roberts, and then I got to LAX and the international, gate, and I'm like, who are these people? I love the scene about China, the chicken quesadilla. I don't know what a quesadilla is. I mean, my only relation to Mexico was the Miss Universe pageant. Whenever the Miss Universe pageant happened every year, and somebody says Mexico, I'm like, oh, that. So I was 12, and then I found that I was undocumented when I was 16 when I applied for a driver's license. So my grandparents,
You found out?
that's how I found out.
And there wasn't a threat, like you were apprehended?
No, because I'm
Yeah.
Filipino, and everybody thinks it's a Mexican thing, right? And so I read about this in the book, but to answer more your question about DACA, so when DACA was, when President Obama signed it into law, and I covered Obama when I was at the Washington Post, so they're actually, so it's complicated in that way, but I was 4 months too old to qualify.
4 months.
I missed the cutoff by 4 months. But what am I gonna do? Complain? 800,000 people, young people, benefited from it. I couldn't,
But then how were you able to be?
I have no idea. I don't know.
It's a fascinating, story that is in
There's
this
a
book.
I really don't know.
If you knock on the door, they could come and get you?
Not on the door. I mean, I pay taxes every year. They can just look at the IRS filings and figure out where I'm paying it from. But it's part of the charade
And
that we're playing
They
here.
have to get high grades and be all.
So, but actually, that's a really great point that you just made. So the DACA, DACA recipients, think about it this way. They have to pay the government $500 every 2 years just so the government doesn't deport them. If we went out the street right now and asked people, as American citizens, if they would pay $500 so this country won't deport them and they can work and pay taxes to the very government that's detaining and deporting them, I bet you people will be like, give me the $500, I'll go to Mexico right now. Which, by the way, more Americans are going to Mexico than there are Mexicans going to the United States. But then again, we don't want to talk about that now, do we?
Wow.
Right? So, but to your point, the census is happening next year. And at Define American, and I hope everybody here checks out Define American. You'll check it out, defineamerican.com. And I'm really happy about this because we were just included in Fast Company's Most Innovative Companies of the Year. So I love that an undocumented person can find an organization that's now included in this thing. A big part of what we do is there's enough people doing legal services work. There's a lot of them here in LA, NILC, a lot of people doing immigration reform work. But our work is how are immigrants portrayed in television, movies, and popular culture. So part of our innovation is in the past few years now, we've consulted on like 42 television shows and movies. So whenever you see an undocumented immigrant on like a Grey's Anatomy episode or Blind Spot or Superstore, it's because they worked with Define American. Roswell, the new Roswell right now, the show, we've been working with them now for a few months. So that's what we do. Because we believe that humanizing these stories and having people meet people as people, not as policy issues, not as walking immigration reform issues, I think is really important. Like I bet you've gotten to know more about Philippine history and culture than watching the show than any segment on MSNBC or CNN can give you, or Fox News.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions? There was some from here. Yes.
You talked about the Tagalog nuances
Oh,
of
yeah.
the play,
Yeah.
and there was this one phrase, I think it was TNT.
TNT, yes.
Yes.
It came out, I think, 3 times or twice. Hazel, was it twice or 3 times? Just kidding.
I'm here now.
Oh, asan siya?
I'm everywhere.
I think dalawa times, di ba? I thought I heard it twice.
So it says it on page 37.
Oh, it's in my book.
It's in the book, okay?
So TNT means, it's basically undocumented for us, but it's very culturally actually appropriate this way. It translates to tago ng tago, which really means hiding and hiding.
Hiding and hiding.
Not just hiding, and hiding. Meaning like you're really hidden, right? Like you're so hidden that they can't even leave the house. I thought that was an interesting theatrical conceit, right? Like I thought that was, because my book is actually, the structure is lying, passing, and hiding. Mm-hmm. So every undocumented person in this country, that's how you live your life. You have to lie about papers. You have to try to pass, so speak like this, right? So that people don't think you have an accent. The first thing I did when I found that I was here illegally was get rid of my Tagalog accent, which is, you heard it on stage. I talk like that. I had to get rid of that, and I did that by doing a lot of PBS and hip hop. I thought I have to sound white and black, right? And then you hide. And then for me, psychologically speaking, it's beyond hiding from the government. Like when you hide from the government, I was really interested in kind of trying to unpack this idea of what happens when the society you belongs to chooses not to see you. Like, how does that lead to kind of the severance from the self? All of a sudden, you're not, what are you, right? And I think we saw that too with how people have to live their life, right? Like, they're here, but they're not here. So then how does that impact how you live your life and how you think about your life, right? In LA, this is the epicenter of the undocumented population in the country. An estimated, I forget, there's about 2.1 million undocumented people in the state of California, and the greatest concentration in the LA area. 1 out of 7 Koreans is undocumented. We don't talk about that, right? So a lot of undocumented African and Caribbean immigrants, they're rarely a part of the conversation. I don't know if you heard about the rapper 21 Savage, what happened to him. So Define American actually has been working with other coalition groups to really connect the dots between mass detention and mass incarceration, and how the black immigrant community has been targeted because of that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I work in the mental health field, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned this with your therapist. And having worked in the mental health field for a while, it seems as though people who identify as Filipino don't tend to seek services very often.
We watch the FC.
And seek services, seek mental health services. And so I think it'd be helpful for me to know, because I can only imagine the trauma. What would be helpful in terms of getting services to that population?
It's a great question. She lives here in LA. But let me just address the larger point you're making, which is that I really think we have a overall mental health crisis in this country.
The White House.
In the White House. is a mental health issue. But again, I think it's important that we provide legal services. I think it's important that we provide help in all the ways we can. But the mental health part of this, to me, does not get the kind of resources nor the seriousness that it really, really demands. Right? I mean, we are dealing with trauma, unlike, I think, especially in the school system, especially, that's why the Me Too movement, to me, like the intersection of women's rights and immigrant rights and what's happening to Latinas in particular in this area, like apparently according to the LAPD, there are less Latinas reporting domestic abuse cases because they're afraid that if they report that they're getting taken advantage of by their partner might call ICE. So if the police comes, what happens, right? And that's just all ethnicities. So I hope that there's more resources for that. To your question about Filipinos specifically, I think it's not an accident, by the way, that there were a lot of jokes in this play, because I think Filipinos like to joke around a lot to hide all of that ugly stuff. There was a scene, I'm forgetting Hazel, which the scene was. I forgot the scene where, people were getting too serious, right? And like, oh, don't be so serious. Don't be so serious.
So serious naman.
So serious naman. Tama na.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's so our culture. Like, whatever. I remember the time I sat my whole Filipino family down and said, okay, I'm gonna come out as undocumented. This is what I'm going to do. I explained to everybody. Everybody was like, what are you doing? My cousins and uncles started cracking jokes right away. That was the only way they knew how to deal with it. They couldn't handle the fact that I was introducing something really serious, right?
And that's a huge protective factor.
Huge.
You don't want to take that away.
I would argue that comedy is actually really important. I think it's part of the healing process. The question though is like, how does a mental health professional go in there and go, okay, no more hiding behind the jokes, right?
And let's not also forget there's a very big stigma in the Filipino community about mental health. Nakakahiya, which means how embarrassing.
How embarrassing.
And we do not disclose openly that we need help because it shows a flaw in your character, so to speak, from a Filipino perspective.
Yeah.
And as a Filipino, we are resilient. We are known to be resilient and strong, and we will bear anything to overcome all the challenges we have as a people, as a culture. So I think that is a very big reason, the shame aspect.
Which is why even the Divina character and how the incest in the family was being handled, I thought was really layered, right? And that's the kind of thing that we don't talk about. It's also, I don't want to when I watch the Filipino channel, which is like our number one source of entertainment in the Philippines, it's a monopoly, you don't see these kinds of stories. It just does not, it's too much, right? Like people just want to stay very, I think it's, again, part of the gift of colonialism. It's like these kind of, this very simplistic, one-sided telenovelas, right? Like that does not want to really penetrate.
Yeah, no pushing buttons.
I'm not criticizing anything. I am deportable, so I feel so free to say whatever I want. It's actually quite beautiful, I have to tell you. It's been kind of freeing that way.
Okay, we can take one
One more
last
question.
question.
The most overt racist anti-immigrant policies, attitudes of our government focuses on people coming over the southern border.
Yes.
How are things different from those people to the people, including Filipinos, who arrive here by plane?
Which is a great question. By the way, about 40% of the total undocumented population arrived by plane. Can you imagine? 40%. Right? And so we've shut down this government for how many days? 35 days, because we can't talk about Mexico. I actually think, I say this a lot now, and I'm saying, but we're in LA, but I said this when I was in Lawrence, Kansas. I was really proud of saying this out loud in Kansas. I actually think we owe the Mexican people of this country an apology. There are about 33 million Mexicans in this country, millions of whom have been here since the beginning of time, right? And yet we have allowed this issue to be so racialized and bastardized in this way. And to me, the biggest real crisis is with kids. These young, 50% of the California student population is quote-unquote Latino, most of whom are Mexican. And yet we have shut down a government because we can't honestly talk about Mexican history and like the Baracero program and what that did. In the book, I actually have this one chapter that was among the hardest to write because I really wanted to keep it short. It's called Mexican Jose and Filipino Jose. That's what I call the chapter. Because remember Prop 187? Did you remember Prop 187? Like, it's the precursor to the era that we're living in now, right? When back then, actually, Governor Pete Wilson said that teachers had to check the immigration status of the students. So I was in science class, 7th grade. I didn't know I was undocumented yet at the time. It was before I went to the DMV. I was sitting in class, and Jose, my classmate Jose, there was 2 Joses in class, Mexican Jose, Filipino Jose. Jose turns to me and says, "Hey, where's your green card?" I'm like, "What?" So he took his out, because he brought it to school. I guess his parents thought, bring it to school in case the teacher asks. And I said, "I don't know, what is that?" Because I didn't know what it was. I didn't have to know, right? And then he goes, "Oh, your name is Jose, but you look Asian. You're going to be okay." And then you tie that to how the whole issue of illegal immigration happened. You know, prior to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, right? It was not illegal for Mexicans to come to the United States. They're our neighbors. There was the Bracero program. There was an actual understanding about labor, about, you know, all that. The very law that allowed my Filipino family members to come here is the very law that it made it illegal for Mexicans to come here. That's a big one. Right? And so, but we don't understand that. And that's why, to me, part of the challenge is how do these two communities, if you put the Latino community and the Asian community together, they actually constitute the majority of California. And yet, with some great exceptions, there's very little being done for these two groups to really work together. And thankfully they're marrying each other, which is always a good thing. But, right, like good food, great food. But like beyond that, like what does engagement look like, right? Like, I thought it was interesting too that part of the play is this idea that America is just something you consume, right? It's something that I love the Gucci little pillow. Chanel. That sounds like my aunt. I asked for a Chanel bag. Why is this exactly the problem? Exactly the problem. Like, I can't tell you, my grandmother, here's a little story. I brought my Lola, who's 81. I finally surrendered and bought her a Louis Vuitton purse, which cost me an arm and a leg. Do you know how much these things, the real ones, right? I had never seen my Lola cry. The status that this purse, and I almost looked at her, I almost wanted to take it away. Because I was so offended that such one thing could mean so much. You know, does it mean the blue eyes and the blonde hair that she's never gonna have? Does it mean this history that she's not a part of? Does it mean there's something that somehow she sees better than where she comes from? What is that about? Right? And I think that, you know, I mean, that's a whole play onto itself. But, you know, I just think there's so much there that we all have to be present for. And I hope that, by the way, in this mental health crisis that we're having in this country, I hope that part of it is hopefully all of us feel more compelled to face it and not just like look away. Because it's easier.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause.
Oh yeah,